Hey, good Thursday morning, guys. Thanks for logging on to BAMWX.com. Meteorologist Ed Valley here with your short and long range video analysis. Most of this will, be covering the longer range here through the month of November. We got some key data in here this morning that really solidifies our thinking. But first, I wanted to show you the current advisories out as of 7 a.m. Central Time. We do have some dense fog advisories out across eastern Kansas up into northern Missouri, southeastern Iowa, western portions of Illinois, and then up into Wisconsin as well. And those expire between about 10 a.m. and about noon here across the middle of the country. Now, beyond that, we will be dealing with a weak front moving through here today, bringing some showers and storms to the Ohio Valley. And then the bigger threat here is actually over the weekend. Looks like Sunday night, we're going to have a pretty substantial threat of some severe weather here across the Ohio Valley, including much of Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and southern Michigan. And right now, we're definitely touching on this in great detail in our local zone forecast. So make sure to check those out. If you don't have access, don't ever hesitate to reach out if you'd like access. We can hook you up there with a deal. But again, with that system and the system we're going to get here at the end of this week, it's going to be a pretty good amount of rain. And that's not good news for a lot of folks that I've talked to that are clients of ours that still need to get beans out of the ground and other crops too, across southern Michigan, down into Indiana, Ohio, and portions of Illinois as well. So unfortunately, we don't predict, we don't make the weather. We just kind of tell it like it is. And unfortunately, it's not looking too great with 1 to perhaps 3 or 4 inches of rain across the Ohio Valley through the end of next week. Now, speaking of next week, let's backtrack and look at the upper pattern here that's going on this week. 1 to 5 day upper height anomalies. You notice we have this big ridge still centered in the Bering Sea. That's going to be important towards the end of the video for the month of November. We also have, in response to that ridge, we have, the ridge here. We go down, we got the trough in the northwest, and then we got a broad ridge across the eastern United States, and that's associated with the fact that we don't have any blocking up near Greenland. Notice how there's low heights here instead of high heights. If we had some higher heights, maybe the pattern would look a little bit more like, I don't know, something like this. You have high heights here, low heights across the U.S., but we don't have that. And that's why we're in this much warmer pattern. And you can see that in our week 1 temperature outlook. We have 8 to 12 degrees above normal from Texas all the way up to Connecticut and Rhode Island. And notice in the northern plains in Northwest, we are chilly. We're 5 to 15 degrees below normal. So it's going to be a tale of two portions of the country here, warm and cold. And in the middle, that's where we have our active storm track and above normal precipitation. So looking into the 6 to 10, notice that ridge in the Bering Sea is still there. Same pattern overall, but notice how the ridge kind of breaks down in the east, and that lines up actually really well with what occurred in the Bering Sea back on the 27th of October, 26th, 27th. Notice there was a big trough coming into the Bering Sea, and 17 days later or so, that's what you get in the U.S., and you notice that's exactly what we're getting. We have a ridge, in the central and western U.S., and then a brief trough developing in the east, and that's exactly correlated with that Bering Sea rule that we just discussed. But notice, as we get back into the 11 to 15 day, unfortunately, if you want the cooler risks, we're going to just revert back right to the pattern that we had, especially in the middle of the U.S. Again, that Bering Sea ridge is still prominent even into the 11 to 15 day, but our week 2 outlook is cooler than week 1 because of that cooler risk around day 10. And you can see slightly below normal temperatures for a lot of the Midwest, Ohio Valley, and interior Northeast. Above normal will be situated back along the Gulf Coast and into the Southwest. Now, this whole pattern is being driven by what we call the East Pacific Oscillation. That's a measure of the heights and the difference in heights across the Pacific Ocean. And we notice right now we're a strong negative. We're about 2.5 to 3 standard deviations below normal for the EPO index. And as we move forward in time, we're going to actually rise that EPO index back towards neutral. And simply put, we're going to have this ridge in portions of the North Pacific. You see that here, but we have a trough of low pressure now developing near Hawaii, just north of Hawaii. That happened here over the last few days. And by the time we get towards the 11 to 15 day, notice how that trough of low pressure kind of expands. That allows that EPO index to revert back towards that neutral stage. And we notice here in the historical composites for a very strong negative EPO, it's very similar to our week 1 outlook. Okay, this is again the EPO when it's between negative 2.5 and negative 3 standard deviations below normal. And here is our week 1 forecast. You see, very similar, which I think is extremely interesting, to be honest. And as we move forward, you see how that EPO goes back towards neutral by the 10th of the month. So we took a very weak negative EPO by the 10th of the month, and notice how it's more of a broad, cooler than normal, but not very cool. You see what I'm saying? And it lines up almost perfectly, guys. So that allows us to add a little bit more confidence to the forecast, which, as you know, is always a good thing. But unfortunately, as we get towards the second half of the month, I think we're going to revert this pattern back to what we're seeing now. And with that, in the notes, I did put a slide here talking about the latest JMA and PWAMA data. And we notice both feature a very strong ridge for the month of November in the east, trough to the west, and then a ridge again in the Bering Sea, a very strong ridge. You see that? Very similar. Actually, to be honest, the team was talking earlier this morning, and it's almost impossible to have a long-range model like this, 2 models showing the exact same thing. It's very difficult to do, but unfortunately, if you want cooler risks, the ridge lines up with what the Bering Sea is showing today. Here's the Bering Sea. Notice that ridge. Take that out 17 to 21 days later, and that's the end of the month of November. So everything's talking here with some warmer risks to end the month. But when you have a trough running into a ridge like this, here's the JMA precipitation forecast for the month of November. And we notice we're going to have this big ridge across the Bering Sea. Like I said, we have this trough digging into portions of the northwest, and then that ridge again developing in the east. And in between, we're going to get this active pattern developing from the northern plains all the way into the Ohio Valley. So that's, while it might be warm, we do think it will remain active through the month of November. And looking at the PWAMA data, very similar with the Ohio Valley above normal in the precipitation department. Now, going back to the Bering Sea, here's a look at the Bering Sea in the 1 to 5 day. Notice an incredible ridge developing across the region. That lasts into the 6 to 10 day. And then look at this, in the 11 to 15, that ridge actually strengthens, okay? So it's some incredible consistency going forward in the next 15 days. One thing to note, though, and again, this is with a grain of salt because it is in the 11 to 15 day. Notice how this ridge is a little bit further to the west compared to previous. Here's the 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15. Notice how it's, kind of moving westward. That may, and it may, allow for a little bit cooler conditions in right along the East Coast, perhaps at the end of the month. But honestly, guys, it's looking very warm for the most part once we get past this cool stretch between the 10th and the 15th of the month. Last thing I wanted to show was the latest 16 to 30 analog from the European, and it lines up, again, almost exactly with what our forecast was for the month of November. Coolest north and west, warmest south and east. Notice in the northeast, though, it's a little bit cooler. Maybe that has something to do with what the Bering Sea is showing there in the 11 to 15. Again, it's a shot in the dark, not something significant right now, but certainly a very warm pattern is on the table here for the second half of the month. So that's all I have for today's long-range analysis. If you have any questions, let us know. Otherwise, enjoy your Thursday, and we'll talk to you soon.